Now, moving on to our next event, I want to introduce the moderator, Osama Salah, who is the program director of CSA-UAE chapter and IT security specialist in a UAE government entity. Osama, over to you. A quick check. Aditya, Tousif, can you unmute yourself and just do a quick check if you're ready for it?
Yeah, hi, Shivani. I think we're good.
Super. Over to you, Osama.
Okay. Thank you, Shivani. Thank you, Hadi. Welcome, everyone, to our second session with our friends from IBM. We have with us Aaditya Bhagra. Adi is an associate partner with IBM Security Services in UK and Ireland. And he has over 12 years experience in building, leading, and delivering complex security transformation programs to help enable and secure businesses. Adi started his career as a web application developer with America Online and has since done a variety of roles in cybersecurity, spanning both consulting and industry with organizations such as Accenture, PwC, and AXA. He has strong cross-domain functional skills and is a specialist in cloud and application security, cybersecurity strategy, and target operating model. He is also passionate about mentoring and developing high-performing talent, both in consulting and cyber. Blue. Sorry?
Okay. Yeah, blue, dark blue. Then this blue and the. क्या चल रहा है? कॉल पे?
Okay. More recently, Adi has been actively involved in supporting organizations in securing their cloud transformation journeys across IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS service models. He is an AWS certified cloud security specialist and member of SANS JIAC advisory board. Adi is an alumnus of the London School of Economics and Political Science in London and Bocconi University Milan with doubles masters in international management. And with Adi, we have also his colleague, Tousif, Syed. Tousif leads cloud security and security strategy, risk and compliance services for the Middle East and Africa region. He has over 18 years of experience in cybersecurity consulting, designing new service offerings, practice management, managing customer relations, leading and building teams, and executing large and complex cybersecurity projects. He has a keen interest in research and has published articles on security intelligence and Harvard Business Review. Tousif has a bachelor's degree in electronics and communication engineering and master's degree in management from Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He is also a master's degree candidate at the Harvard University. Andy and Tousif's presentation is titled Innovate at Speed. Operating a hybrid multi-cloud environment is different from yesterday's world, and so is securing it. In this session, Adi and Tousif will dig deeper into the cybersecurity imperatives that organizations like yours face around the world, and we will hear about interpreting compliance controls, assessing and managing risk with prescriptive controls, ensuring data-centric protection with zero trust architecture, managing threats across hybrid and multi-cloud, and achieving continuous detection and response. Please join me in welcoming Adi and Tousif. Adi?
Thanks, Osama. So firstly, I want to take the opportunity to thank Cloud Security Alliance at UAE and the entire team for giving us the opportunity to talk to the member community and also the audience. Thank you for joining us for today's session. We certainly hope you find today's session interesting, and we want to leave you with some food for thought as you start your own cloud security journey. As Osama mentioned, in today's session, we want to dig deeper into what it means in terms of operating a hybrid multi-cloud environment from a security perspective. We'll try and demystify hybrid cloud security and provide you with a framework as you start your own cloud journey. But before I do that, I want to really just step back and talk about the paradigm shift that cloud computing has brought on, right? Over the last few years, cloud has certainly accelerated the pace of digital transformation. I still remember the days when provisioning of a server could take anywhere from a few weeks to months, getting all the finance approvals to actually raising the change request and actually finally getting the server provisioned. In today's day and age, it takes a few minutes. Add on to this the fact that you have attractive pay-per-use cost models provided by different public cloud providers, the lack of any upfront capex, and it's no surprise that cloud is now part of every CIO digital transformation strategy. And while we've seen a lot of cloud adoption and an acceleration in cloud adoption over the last decade, especially with newer organizations, Netflix and Spotify are some great examples. When it comes to traditional enterprises, what we tend to find is that they're still in their nascency when it comes to starting the cloud journey. As you can see on the slide, 80% of enterprise workloads are yet to migrate to the cloud. And when we're talking to our customers, 90% of the issues that we hear are related to security. So security still seems to be a big inhibitor in terms of cloud adoption. Again, this is not just security on-prem or on cloud. It's a hybrid model that we need to bring together. It's a distributed security model with shared responsibility, both for the organization as well as for the cloud provider. Tousif, I want to bring you in here. What are some of the challenges that you're hearing from our clients when it comes to cloud adoption?
Well, the ones that come to mind are, very key, the shared services responsibility, right? What does our client own as a responsibility for security, and what does the cloud provider own? An example would be, you see a data breach, right? And how do you manage the situation? Who has ownership to do what, right? So it is very, very key. So do you have the right contracts? Do you have the right policies, processes defined, right? It becomes very, very important to understand. While it is shared, accountability still comes to the client, right? Our customer here, and that's because of data. I think that's one. Second, I think with the growing regulations and the compliance needs, a lot of inhibitions that our customers are facing towards adopting cloud. I mean, they have to move because the digital teams and innovation teams are moving really fast into it. So that's the second key challenge, I would say. Third one is, which relates to the earlier point, is how do you ensure secure by design, right? And that's really important because it fits into the culture and how security needs to play a role much earlier into the whole application development cycle, right? So we'll talk more about these challenges, but what challenges are you seeing, Adi, based on your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Tousif, and some really good examples. I think one thing that I hear in addition is around threat management. As you can see, security today is being delivered from multiple places in a hybrid cloud environment, and customers need to quite quickly understand the events that are coming from Azure, that are coming from AWS, that are coming from their own on-prem SIEM, understand the events, detect these events, and to be able to remediate these even more quickly. So moving forward, this can be quite a fairly daunting task. It's not just about security alone, it's extending that to the cloud. So what we've done is actually simplified this in terms of a framework for you. And the framework is really 3 pillars. The top pillar, as you can see, is the business side. This is about understanding your regulatory requirements, defining the set of controls, and then managing those. This allows organizations to be able to demonstrate compliance, manage risk, and also govern it. The second pillar in blue is the technology aspect. This is where we get the opportunity to protect the workloads in a hybrid cloud environment. That's across identity, data security, ensuring that the right individuals have the right access to the right set of data. And the second part of that technical piece is around continuous detection and monitoring, and ensuring that once we've implemented these controls, we continue to monitor those, and we can detect any changes in configuration and be able to respond to those changes quite quickly. The last pillar is around culture. As we see today, security is actually touched upon multiple personas. It's a distributed capability and a shared responsibility. So the third piece really is about the cultural aspect of shifting security to the left, infusing it with DevOps, and ensuring that we're protecting applications and services right from the get-go, all the way to production. So what we want to do in today's session is really talk through each of these pillars in a little more detail and provide you with a mechanism of how to use this framework, and also share some examples from a client perspective. Now, the first one is around managing risk. And as you can see on the slide, regardless of the industry that you operate in, whether that's financial services, whether that's travel and transportation, oil and gas, we're all subjected to some sort of regulatory requirements. This starts with global standards such as PCI and ISO. We then have industry standards like NIST and Cloud Security Alliance. And then depending on the geography where your application or service may be deployed, a set of local regulations also come to bear. Now, these requirements and regulatory requirements are changing at a very rapid pace to keep up with the threat landscape. They're no longer at a high level. The requirements are also getting very granular. Add on to this, the request for compliance and audit, which is also changing at a frequent level. And it can be quite hard for you as an organization to really determine how do you start and embark on your cloud journey. So what we've done is actually, we've created a framework to make it easier and provide you with a mechanism for continuous compliance. We call this the continuous compliance framework. The idea is that you're not generating a report every time there's an audit, but having and maintaining a state of continuous compliance where you get notified only when there's a deviation from the norm and when something bad happens. Now, in order to do this, what you need is a unified controls framework that's tailored to your needs. As you can see on the screen at the bottom, we've got the global base controls. We then adapted these controls on the local market regulations and have made them specific for your organization, specific for your industry and geography, so that you only focus on the controls that matter. And as an example, on this slide, you can see that our team worked with a client and we're able to distill the controls down to 280 from the entire control universe, spread across 7 control libraries. We then used technology and process to implement these controls, and infuse them into DevOps, into the development lifecycle, and making sure that our configurations were secure. And by taking this approach, it becomes really easy to then show business value and demonstrate compliance, which is the top piece. You're able to mitigate risk, not just for your organization, but also for third and fourth parties, which is again getting quite important today. Tousif, I want to bring you in here. Can you talk us through the example that I referenced here?
Sure, and it's a good example to what you were referencing, but also the challenges that we discussed before. And this was for a major investment bank, and they're really unsure how to move securely to the cloud, right? So the example tells how the customer was confident to eventually be able to adopt cloud at a much faster pace. So we started with building a unified compliance framework for this customer. So we had NIST 853 as a baseline, and then we mapped the relevant regulations and standards from a security point of view for this customer. So we built a control framework of 277 controls. We saw that the client had 147, so there was obviously a gap there. We worked with the customer in seeing how this gap can be plugged. So we identified roles and responsibilities of how this needs to be implemented. But then we took this process a step further. We implemented a cloud security posture management solution to automate security and compliance. So the client was able to see where they're doing well, where they have gaps from a compliance point of view, but on a continuous basis. And then that helped them make decisions on how they need to move and how fast they need to move to the cloud, right? So that was very, very helpful, Adi.
Thanks, Tousif, and again, great work and a great example. I'd like to now move on and talk about the technology elements in more detail. Starting with the data-centric approach to zero trust. In the modern era, as we know it, the way we generate, consume, and process data has changed. Data in the digital world is the new oil. We know it, and unfortunately, our adversaries know it too. And this makes securing confidential and sensitive data paramount. And approaching and adopting a zero trust model for data-centric security enables just this. Zero trust is all about ensuring that the right identity has the right access to the right data under the right conditions. Now, why don't we look at, how do you take a zero trust architecture and approach it from a data security perspective? Tousif, can you actually talk us through an example of how you've done this?
Yeah, sure. And just a quick perspective as well on zero trust. And in my view, any security professional should have been doing zero trust, right? I know it's a lot more discussed these days. It's becoming sort of a fad. But if you're a security professional, you followed need to know basis, then yes, you would have been. Google implemented zero trust architecture in 2009, but it was coined by a PhD student in 1994, right? So it's not a concept that is new, but so we have had limitations on how this could have been implemented earlier, particularly in our local networks where we could have legacy environment where we had to trust, right? But as we move, we're getting solutions that can help implement zero trust properly, and then that is getting pushed by the cloud adoption, right? So for one of the client in this region, it's a large oil and natural gas company. So we're building the enterprise security architecture based on zero trust principles, right? And as part of that engagement, so we have defined principles that are, we talk about knowing users, devices, and data in the organizations, having a single strong identity, authenticating everywhere, knowing the health of devices, monitoring them regularly, not trusting the local network, right? And putting policies that are according to the data criticality, and adopting services which actually enable zero trust, right? And maybe another example that would help see how it's a bit more relevant is for a large manufacturing company, again, in this region. They had workloads in on cloud, PaaS workloads and SaaS workloads, implemented IBM's Security Access Manager for authentication and identity governance and intelligence, right? So earlier the client had for a particular application, about 3 roles, but then post this solution, we saw that the roles have to be at least about 20, right? So the granularity increased there, right? Enforcing the zero trust principles for this particular client. So it spans across different domains of security, obviously. So as we see in here, for the client, the way we're building the architecture, we created design patterns for microsegmentation, for container security, for IAM, for privilege access management, application security, DevSecOps, and encryption, right? So the architects are able to use that as a key reference, which has reduced their work in determining what actually controls have to exist across these domains for zero trust. And I think you must you have also advised clients on zero trust, and what are some of the outcomes that you have seen that you want to share?
Thanks, Tousif. And again, it's quite a daunting task. And if you look at a slide like this, the first question that comes to mind is, where do I start, right? So if I can talk about a couple of other examples that I've seen, One of the things that our clients are doing today, sorry, let me move on to the next slide, is really focus on a specific domain, because Zero Trust, again, is a combination of multiple domains across security. And clients are really focusing on a single domain and ensuring that they have coverage across that. In this case, the client started with identity and access management. They had more than a dozen Active Directory forests, different identity contacts for their cloud providers, different identity contacts for their SaaS providers. And they had to bring this all together into a unified identity fabric so that their workforce had a single source of truth when they were accessing applications and servers with the least privilege capability. So they started, number one, with modernizing workforce access. And once they'd achieved this, and as they matured, they extended this thinking to consumer identity, where some of the same principles apply. But you've got to balance fraud and threat protection with usability to minimize friction for the end user. And this is where the client built upon this unified identity fabric and actually added on adaptive access capabilities to take advantage of not just the user's identity, but also the device identity, the network identity, the context of the environment, the context of the transaction, so that you're actually evaluating every transaction and subjecting it to the right level of friction. Now that's Zero Trust in play. And finally, you can extend this thinking to also privileged access, where quite a lot of the common attacks happen, and you're infusing privileged access not just for humans, but also for applications, when we think about API access. So that's how the customer was actually able to unify the IAM layer and start on the journey to Zero Trust. If I now talk about another example, on the other end of the spectrum, we've had another customer that's taken this approach for user identity, for networks, but also extended this out for data protection and looking at protecting data from a holistic perspective. As I mentioned earlier, data today is the new oil. It's sprinkled everywhere. And the first thing that you've got to do is really understand, where does your data actually lie? You've got to do the data discovery. That means talking to databases, talking to different SaaS providers, cloud providers, watching the network to really understand where your data is living. And once we understand that, we then apply the right level of analytics and artificial intelligence to understand the sensitivity and value of the data, so that you can apply the right policies to protect the data in the right way. You protect to ensure the right individual or process has access, but also to protect in terms of, confidentiality when we look at things like encryption and tokenization. And really understanding the sensitivity factor is what helps you decide your protection mechanisms. Whether when we talk about the cloud, do you want to rely on key management of the cloud provider, or do you want to use your own keys where you keep the keys on-prem, you encrypt the data, and then only store the encrypted data on the cloud, so that not even the cloud provider can actually see that. And that's effectively Zero Trust when it comes to data protection. But you can't do all this at one go, and you need a systematic approach. Like I said, starting with really first discovering the data, understanding it, ensuring it's classified, knowing the sensitivity of the data, and then applying the right policies to protect it. So these were some of the examples on Zero Trust in play. If I move forward, sorry. Now, once you define these controls, you need to also ensure that you're continuously monitoring them to detect anomalies. And once you find an anomaly, you got to ensure that you're able to correct it. But the reality is that security today is being delivered from multiple personas. It's a shared responsibility, right? And you've got a persona that's closer to the line of business, your application teams, your enterprise architects, your developers, and then there's a persona that's closer to the security office. And both of them have a role in a security transformation. Although the line of business may want to accelerate the speed of transformation, security is still important. They may not worry about the big picture, but they still need to do the basic requirements when it comes to security. They've got to communicate with security teams. So it's really important that we set these guidelines for the business to ensure that there's collaboration between the lines of business and security. And it's only then that we can achieve the right outcomes in terms of, security monitoring. Now, behind this simple picture, though, there are a huge number of tools that are actually in play. We talked about, Tousif, you mentioned cloud security posture management. We've talked about data security. We've talked about DevOps, IAM. And typically that's a huge number. And when we talk to practitioners on the ground, what we're hearing is that, there are more than 80 products or tools that they actually need to stitch together to be able to deliver the security outcomes. And that's just a huge task. There's just too much data and not enough people to be able to do this. So, cloud really offers an opportunity to be able to do this differently. With cloud, you can think about a platform-based approach rather than a tool or product-based approach, and really think about a platform that actually brings this all together, brings all your capabilities together, where they're homegrown or from different vendors, but it brings them all together so that you safeguard your investments and derive the right outcomes for your organization. The platform has to be multi-cloud. And as we mentioned, hybrid is not just on-prem or cloud. In many cases, it's actually more than one cloud. You got to make sure that the platform's open. There are many vendors in the market today, and I'm sure that a lot of these organizations are also using multiple tools that provide them with unique value. So as security, it's our job to make these tools, bring these tools together. Either organizations pay for the cost of integration, or they can use an open platform that helps safeguard their investments. And you're bringing like the security events in one place rather than necessarily bringing the data. The platform has to be simple. As I mentioned, there are multiple personas touching security today. So even if an individual is not actually conversant with security, they should be able to work with those security capabilities. And last but not the least is the composability aspect, that really allows you to take a certain number of capabilities from a vendor, a little bit of your own capabilities, and actually bring it all together to derive the best value from the platform. And once you do this, that's how you derive holistic data security, as we talked about, and achieve the right outcomes, or holistic threat management, right? Tousif, I'd like to bring you in again here. If you can, why don't you talk us through an example of how we've done this to ensure unified threat management?
Sure. I think in the region, it has a low adoption, but that is significantly moving. I think we can see adoption of full threat lifecycle in the coming days for sure. But to a certain extent, we have a retail client locally, so where the workloads on Azure and AWS have been integrated with the local SIEM environment, right? And secure our deployment, and we're using the app Pulse to monitor workloads across on-prem and cloud. For other client in the region, we've extended that to use Cloud Visibility app. So this app comes with pre-built widgets for Azure, AWS, and IBM Cloud. So it makes it really, really easy to view what are the account IDs, what are the offense rules are triggering, what are the critical things that they need to see, what are the offenses, what are the events, and so on. So which is making it a bit more, it's making it easier to detect, right? So there's less time spent having to navigate maybe the native controls to monitor how things are happening. And then the teams are spending more time on investigating what really matters, and what's enabling that is the analytics in the existing tool. So the focus on the analytics helps filter those issues that need to be focused on by the analyst, and finally to be able to automate the response. So This is another client, so where they're using Ansible to automate some of the responses to manage the threat life cycle. So if we look at this and put it into a platform-based approach, as I said, it should reduce. And as you see the numbers in here, which are our research that has been done to see how quickly customers are being able to detect, investigate, and respond. So with that, just want to talk about how that enables compliance and management, right, for the workloads in the next slide. As culture becomes very key, as we discussed earlier. So what we would need is to have all these elements in the platform to work. We need a scalable practice, right, which is data-centric, right, and brings in the DevSecOps practices, which actually infuse security and privacy in the DevOps practice. So it starts with enabling the culture. So for a large bank, so they had digital team and innovation team. So they had two teams working on different products at the same time. And the demand in the market was so much that they were moving at a pace which security was not able to really manage. And for an aviation client, what it did is they created security champion related program. So the champions used to get involved with the development teams, right? So this organization created agile teams. They started focusing on products. They reorganized the security team, and the champions were supported by a support group of security professionals at the background. And I think talking about another client, which I guess will give a very good view as to what challenges people can see when they're trying to implement DevSecOps. I think we lost the presentation. So I'll just continue while we try and get that presentation back. So this is for a bank in the region. So we did a review. So they had a Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and they had the services of Pivotal Kubernetes services and Pivotal application services. So as we did a review, we saw that they didn't have the security champion program, right? So there was no threat modeling that was done. There was no security team involvement during the planning stages of app development. They didn't have quality and toll gates defined. So they didn't have application security or container security related standards defined. And they had tools. So they had Twistlock, but that was not implemented properly. So for instance, it was not integrated into the production environment. And finally, there were no KPIs and KRIs as well. So we see DevSecOps across the entire value chain, right, of the development and operation. So looking into plan and design. So where understanding the risks and threats become very, very key. So doing the modeling, understanding the compliance requirements, then ensuring that in the core and build, it's not just about application, but also infrastructure that needs to be catered to from a security point of view. And before deploying, ensuring that the applications are hard and the secure configuration ensured. And all of this is automated, right, with the tool chain. And finally, being able to monitor. So for this client, we also saw that the logs that are being generated are they're not integrated with the same environment, right? And so that was also something that we saw. So essentially, what we need to have in our culture is to be able to shift left. And with the IBM's research team, what we've seen is the clients say that about 50% of application security issues get identified and remediated if shift left is adopted, right? Resulting in significant cost reduction. So that was a good example. So Aaditya, if you want to put things together and show how things look.
Yeah, thanks, Tousif. And I really agree. I mean, we talk a lot about the technology side, but it's the people and culture side that's so important. And that's actually a lot harder to do, because that's the real transformation in the mindset of the individuals and the people to be able to succeed. So we've talked about a lot of things today, and obviously we discussed a number of different topics. Sorry, I'm trying to move on to the next slide. And as I said earlier, this can be quite a daunting task. I'll try and bring it all together before we wrap up. It's quite a complex framework, but at the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is effectively deploy a number of different workloads in a variety of infrastructure, whether that's on-prem, on cloud, or in the future, even edge, right? These workloads could be containers, non-containers, functions, or even traditional applications. But all of them have to be secure. And that's the blue layer in the middle. And this security comes in, sorry, I talked about the three aspects, but effectively, when we talk about the blue layer, that's the technology layer, right from identity and access management to network security to data security. All of those capabilities have to actually come together in a manner that you're able to demonstrate security and compliance, as well as manage the ever-growing threat landscape with secure operations and threat management. These capabilities have to be then infused into the DevOps lifecycle, not just when the application's deployed, and that's bad practice. And as you mentioned earlier, Tousif, we really need to shift security to the left. So with DevOps, you have the option to really look at a cultural transformation where we have DevOps becoming the common language that we all talk to between the different personas. And we're able to, ensure security right from the get-go as we build applications and services rather than as an afterthought. And once we've actually done all this, that's when the right outcomes have happened, right? And then the business layer, which is at the top, becomes quite easy. We're able to demonstrate compliance and manage risk to the organization, provide a mechanism for secure operations, as well as ensure business continuity. So hopefully you're able to utilize this framework as you think about your own journey to the cloud. If I summarize in the end, first and foremost, this is quite a complex topic, but you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. And we've actually given you a number of links to be able to leverage our expertise. You can talk to any of us to really understand how we've done this and delivered this for other clients, and what are the learnings that we can share with you. We've also got a link to help you with a more sort of co-creation model and sort of a workshop-based approach. And finally, we provide you with some community resources that you can leverage to help you on your own cloud journey. So thank you, everyone. Hope you found this session interesting, and we certainly wish you all the best as you progress on your own journey to the cloud.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you, Tousif. Quite a heavy presentation, lots to unpack there. We have a few questions from the community. One is about continuous compliance monitoring. Now, anyone working in GRC, this is like the holy grail for them, and it's already difficult enough on-premise. So how do you do it in cloud with everything moving, workloads being spun up and down and moving it through regions? How can you achieve continuous compliance monitoring in cloud?
Maybe I can take that question, Adi. So there is a good example that I can actually take. It's just for a retail client globally. So what we did is we started off with, again, creating the unified compliance framework, because the continuous compliance, the key thing is to really know what is it that you really need to comply to, right? So once you do that, you understand the regulations as well, right? So this is where you understand your data, right? So what is it based on the regulations? What is it that needs to stay on-prem, and what is it that needs to go onto the cloud? And one of the things that you would realize is some of the data which may be, say, top secret at this point in time, but if that is related to a product, and once the product gets launched, so that would eventually get public, right? So if you have issues with regulatory norms, then you perhaps just wait till those workloads can be actually on the cloud. And so another example is, again, defining certain data, which if you are a public limited company, so maybe it's confidential now, but can become available to the public. So that's the consideration that you may need to have from a regulatory point of view. So once you have that, so the next step is to see your cloud environments, right? So you onboard the cloud accounts, right? So for this client, the retail client, they had workloads in AWS, Azure, and GCP. We onboarded those accounts. Then we created roles on this cloud security posture management tool, which was Prisma Cloud Compute. And the roles were to define based on whether you need to just monitor, whether you need to do reporting, whether you need to do configuration administration on the CSPM tools. The next thing comes is to define policies, right? So many times we look at creating custom policies because the organization that you are in, and for this client as well, they had, container security standards. The configuration requirements are a bit different, right, than what the policies would allow. So defining custom policies there. Then based on the reporting requirements, so if the tool is not allowing the reports that you need, and based on the compliance requirements, so what customization need to be done in terms of reporting. Then looking into integration. So this tool needs to integrate with, say, your single sign-on or to your SIM environment. So we didn't really have an integration requirement, and the client looked at it at a later point in time, but these are critical considerations. And then finally defining the alerting requirements. So what policies and what alerts and who it needs to go. So these are some of the steps that you would need to follow, right, in a methodical way to be able to unpack and see how you want to go about continuous compliance monitoring.
Excellent. Thank you, Tousif. Another question we have from the community, if you can name some key products used in IAM and PAM. Now, we really don't want to promote specific vendors here, but maybe we can reframe the question. What would be key characteristics in IAM and PAM solutions as they relate to cloud? As a source, I would suggest maybe look at Gartner reports, Forrester, KuppingerCole, all these reports. But maybe if you can just summarize what are key capabilities that are important in cloud.
Sure. Maybe again, I could take, because I was giving an example here earlier, as I could just extend that. And as you say, obviously native capability on the cloud environments, right? I mentioned an example where we deployed IAM Security Access Manager and IAM Identity Governance and Intelligence, right? For another client, it was a private cloud. It's a local client. Not to name the industry as well, but for their private cloud, we implemented Okta, Identity Access Management solution, right? So the reason for this was to unify or give a single sign-on experience for both employees and third parties, right? So when you look at a solution for IAM or privileged access management, what you really need to see is if you're able to create what we discussed earlier, a sort of a unified view on the entire IAM lifecycle, right? So which means you need to have something which is open, okay, which can work with multiple products, legacy products, both on-prem as well as on cloud, right? It is something that you want to look at as you refer to Gartner or any other recommendations for top solutions.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question we have from the community. Most companies customize their own zero trust strategies or approaches using a piecemeal approach. What are your thoughts on this based on your practical experience? How do you approach a zero trust project or implementation?
Yeah, Tousif, would you like me to take that one? I think it's a great question, right? And that's the traditional challenge that security has always had, that people are working in silos in different departments, and and really trying to drive things from there. And I think for me, what's absolutely key is the executive sponsorship and the tone from the top. Zero trust is not just a security-driven transformation. It's a wider digital transformation and a change in mindset from a IT perspective that also needs to happen. With zero trust, if we're planning to do micro-segmentation, network segmentation, we need to get the network teams involved. We need to ensure that they're on board. So my suggestion would be, as you plan your zero trust strategy, or more, to be honest, for me, it's more as you plan your IT strategy or security strategy, that you have the right buy-in from all the different stakeholders in the organization, and also ultimately from the sponsor for such a program, whether it's the CIO office. Ultimately, what you've got to figure out is who's really driving this program, where does the sponsorship lie, what's the right outcome that the organization is trying to achieve. And if this is part of the wider IT strategy and the outcome that the CIO wishes to achieve, then and really you want to leverage that sponsorship from the top to help get a coordinated approach and have a coordinated strategy, then try to do this on your own, because honestly, you'll fail that way. And it's really important that you're able to collaborate and work together. I'd like to reference back to even the personas that we talked about. You've got to bring all those personas together, collaborate, have a common language to be able to deliver on the outcome.
Okay, that makes sense. And I also believe that there's nothing wrong doing things in steps. Piecemeal might sound bad, but it's could also be seen positively, as long as the choices you make fit into a bigger plan. Then maybe that makes sense. Another question we have is about cloud transformation and the whole cloud security journey. How do you get started? Where do people get started on that? It's a more generic question. It's an open question, and actually it mentions two words that I don't like: transformation and journey, because both of them are so overused. Transformation implies that you are done, you move from A to B, and journey implies it never ends. Both of them are somehow, I don't know.
I think,
how do people start?
I think it's again a great question. And when we think about it, and I've been on the industry side, part of transformations, really you find yourself in two positions. One, you find yourself lucky enough that you're actually part of a transformation right from the get-go, when it's actually being started, it's actually being planned as part of the wider organization transformation. And you can actually set the cloud security strategy for your organization, which is lock and sync with your IT strategy. Now, few people find themselves in that position. A lot of us find ourselves in a position where the organization is already embarked on a digital transformation program, of which cloud could be one element. And even when it comes to the cloud, a lot of the designs might have already have been done, some capabilities deployed, and now we've got, you find yourself as a new CISO come in, being told to secure that. So really, what do you do, right? And for me, rather than saying develop a cloud security strategy, for me, it's effectively first understanding and reviewing where things stand. Where if some designs have already been created, are those designs secure? If a secure landing zone or a landing zone has already been created in the cloud, how is it actually secured? What controls were implemented? And really what you need to first do is do an assessment to understand where we actually stand with regards to controls. And based on that assessment, then determine what the next steps need to be. And it could be that you then create a cloud security strategy 2.0, which effectively gives it your flavor, you're clear on what the requirements need to be for security. And then you can drive the right set of actions, projects, and outcomes, whatever they need to be able to do it. So really, like I said, I think you'll find yourself in two positions. You're either going to be there early on from the get-go. You can design some, plan and create a strategy early on. Or if you're coming sometime in the middle, like most of us, it really starts with an assessment and understanding the landscape before you can then create a strategy and drive things forward. So
Adi, I think I can take an example as well, for for a local client in here was looking at migrating their workloads to cloud and what we actually suggested. So the client had, a sort of a strategy that was already defined, which means they had to move beyond what has been done, right? So we proposed a few things that they could look at, right, to help their journey on this cloud migration. One of the things was obviously the unified control framework, which becomes a foundation. But then with that foundation, what you want to do was rationalize security controls, right? So they were looking at multiple cloud vendors, and we want to see, based on the compliance, what is it that the native controls are helping with, because it makes no sense to move to cloud if native controls are not really useful. But then what is it that they need to look beyond? So what controls they need to have, both from people, process, and technology point of view. The other thing that we proposed was to relook at their operating model. So cloud, while many things from a domain point of view remain same, but the skills are different. So the client need to assess what skills they have, whether they are rightly aligned in the organization with respect to DevOps, and what are the key skills and resources that they need. How are they to be organized? So we created a cloud competency security center, or proposed to them. And finally, relook this as an input and see how the strategy needs to change for them, and create some actionable items that they should implement towards their cloud migration.
Okay. You mentioned that we have to rationalize the security controls, what to invest in or what not to invest in. How do you do this rationalization?
Well, for a bank in Europe, this is so a very early adopter, and they were looking at Azure, right? And they, as a bank, they had many local as well as global regulation standards that they had to really follow. So native controls, while the support, to a large extent, but then they also had to see how the other controls, the gap that exists from native controls to the remaining, how can they address that? So they may have controls on-prem, right? They may have some security solutions on-prem that are actually working. How can those solutions get extended to the cloud, right? Mm-hmm. So where does it make sense to just be able to accept the risk of a low-feature native control, right? And do away with an on-prem solution for which they are paying, right? And where does it make sense to not use the native control, but use an external solution? And which becomes particularly important when you have multiple clouds. So where you want to create a unified view into different domains of IAM, or for security or threat management, right? Or data security, right? So this is what the activity is, right? About rationalizing the security controls. How can you optimize, but ensure that you are complying to the regulatory and security needs?
Okay. Great, thank you. In the first presentation, we talked generally about top threats, but maybe you can shed some light on some specific threats that you have seen in our region.
Yeah, so I guess that's a question for me. I think IBM releases a threat report from our X-Force team, which does highlight what the key threats are, and nothing that I have at the top of my mind which would significantly differ. But I think as a region, from that report, what I recollect is the financial services are the number one industry, right, that is being targeted, and that's been continuing for many years in a row, right, based on our threat incident report. And the region is, in fact, a bit difficult in a way, and quite a bit targeted as well from both individual as well as nation-based actors, right? Which makes it really, really important to be able to ensure that practices from a security point of view, the leading ones are actually implemented. And I'm seeing with our client that there is a good rush in ensuring, and there's a good way in which budgets are being allocated to ensure security to address these threats.
Okay. I think we have one last question. When we talk about cloud security, we always talk a lot about technologies. But what other aspects do you believe are critical and need to be considered for anyone moving to cloud besides technology?
Thanks, Osama. And I think that's a great question. We touched upon this briefly, but for me, it starts with the executive sponsorship and the tone at the top. It's really important that your security program has the buy-in of senior stakeholders, and I don't mean just the CISOs. It has to be either at the COO, CIO, or CEO level. There has to be commitment from the organization to support you through the transformation journey. This is not a 6-month, 9-month, 1-year program. Real transformations can take anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So it's a big investment for the organization. And if you don't have that commitment to complete the transformation, you're going to fail eventually. The second aspect is the culture piece. Again, it's really important that we shift the mindset and we ensure that security is being taught by everyone, not just the IT security team, but it's really in the minds of your users, your employees, your administration people, and you're able to align everybody around having a security culture. And the last piece is around people and ensuring that they have the right skills. We've got certainly a lot of experienced individuals who've been managing infrastructures in a particular way in the data centers, who have a lot of knowledge and experience, but they really need to change that knowledge and experience and be able to operate in a cloud environment where you're no longer actually deploying devices in a data centers. You don't have to rack and stack them. It's a very different approach. It requires a different thinking. We're also moving into an infrastructure as a code world where we're using Terraform and things like Ansible to actually, provision the infrastructure by writing a few scripts. So all that requires, reskilling of a lot of experienced individuals in your organization. It requires investment, again, from your organization to make sure that, they're trained and they're up to speed and they can actually operate in a cloud environment.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Adi and Tousif. I think we reached the end of the presentation and I'll hand back to Shivani.
Sure. Thank you very much, Aaditya and Tousif. That was very interesting, especially the whole aspect about how, these cloud aspects are literally use cases that you've put with regards to UAE and this region. That was really fantastic. Thank you, Osama, for moderating it with all the questions, etc. So we've come to the end of our sessions, and in terms of closing notes, thank you very much to all of you who have attended. To the members of the CSA-UAE community, keep in touch with us, reach us for any, if you want to participate, you want to contribute, reach us. You have your email, I've put it in the chat. Join. For those who have not yet become a members, do join us in our LinkedIn groups, share the links as well. There's a form in there to become a member. Do become a member if you're interested to help us contribute further. Please join us. We have some amazing research tracks that are ongoing. One is to map the CCM, the Cloud Control Matrix, with the UAE Information Assurance Standard. That's ongoing, about to be closed. We've had 20 plus members who actually contributed for that. And an upcoming research track with a liaison with a large company is due. We would be announcing that soon. So, keep in touch with us and, follow our social media. So here is us logging out. Thank you very much and look forward to seeing you soon in our next event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Osama. Thank you all. Have a good day ahead.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.